If it wasn't obvious from the outset, full spoilers ahead for the third Heavensfield movie and the visual novel. With the third and last Heavensfield movie releasing in Japan in roughly 15 days as of writing this, there's no time like the present to discuss the possibilities of what ending it will choose to adapt. While the obvious answer would be the true ending of the route, Return to Spring, personally, I'm holding out for the more bittersweet ending of the two, Cherry Blossom's Dream. The ending, which upon completion, I had to legitimately sit and think about, as the resolution left my thoughts scattered. The true end, while working better as a happy ending to the visual novel as a whole, feels out of place in Heavensfield. To show you what I mean, I'm going to hit the key points of the visual novel and translate that to the endings. It will all make sense in time, I promise. I'm not going to be the first to tell you, but Heavensfield isn't exactly a happy story. It deals with many issues that the previous routes wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and as such, carries the most weight when discussing. Kinoku Nasu, the man responsible for the series, said something along the lines of, Heavensfield is a story of translating those ideals Shiro had into reality. Ideals that, as discussed in Unlimited Blade Works, are incredibly flawed and without question are going to get him killed eventually. Though in Heavensfield, he dies much sooner. Sooner than you might think, actually. This is the only route where Shiro abandons his ideals in favor of protecting Sakura. While a very poignant moment that shapes the whole route, it is the metaphorical death of Shiro as we have known him up until this point. As opposed to UBW and even Fate Route Shiro, this time around, his ideals that have kept him going for the past 10 years mean nothing in the face of Sakura, who he just can't let suffer alone any longer. This all comes to a head when Shiro rushes to find Sakura after renouncing his dream in the rain. A scene that will be permanently etched in my mind as the turning point to the route, similar to the projection of Caliburn in the Fate Route and Archer's betrayal in UBW. Shiro realizes that he was foolish for even considering the possibility of not being on Sakura's side in all of this. While it's easy to claim ignorance, it's much harder to ignore the clues that were staring him right in the face after the fact. Shiro struggles with knowing that he didn't want to confront those issues, subconsciously choosing to ignore them until this very moment. In the rain, he beckons Sakura to come home to the Illya household, where she rightfully belongs as a member of the family. Shiro could have stuck to his guns and held true to his dream. He knows she's already been harming people through the shadowy figure, and that the rate at which that happens will almost certainly get worse. But despite that, he will support her until the bitter end, regardless of what his better judgment says, and regardless of her not being a good person. When translating such ideals as being a superhero into reality, what can one person do but protect who they love? Shiro is repeatedly shown to be a broken person throughout the visual novel, and this is one of the only times we get to see what's left of him break, for lack of a better word. Shiro's vow to Sakura flies in the face of all of his ideals, and he struggles with it even after this scene. Until he renews that promise and steals his mind a few days later, when, knife in hand, ready to end the route days earlier than it had the right to, he realizes that he can't kill the one responsible for all the suffering, Sakura. Something fundamentally different from his father Kiritsugu, who, when faced with the same option, would go so far as killing his wife and daughter if it meant saving more people. Having those ideals challenged broke Shiro in the end, and his mindset continuously degrades from this point on, now that what's kept him going for 10 years is gone. Here's where the toxic, symbiotic relationship between Sakura and Shiro begins. They both need one another to function. Shiro switched from one live or die mindset to another, and Sakura has depended on him for a while at this point. Many times she has thoughts about harming or killing him so that she can keep him all to herself. She is a person who can't do things on her own at this point, and given everything we're told, it makes perfect sense. Of course she would be possessive over him if he's keeping her sane, especially with the Grail pushing her negative traits forward more and more. Speaking of the Grail, when the shadowy creature first appeared, I instinctively knew it was Sakura. Said shadowy thing takes out many people, including the final boss of the past two routes, Gilgamesh, rather effortlessly. An impressive feat, though admittedly a terrifying one. As the shadow gains more power, it starts to have a rather negative effect on Sakura, and through the interludes, cracks in her personality begin to show. The first instance of which I alluded to earlier. In this interlude, she wishes Shiro would stop fighting and putting his life in danger each night. Upon thinking about it further, she decides that if he were gravely injured and couldn't leave the house, then, well, she would get exactly what she wanted. Plus, she'd get to nurse her beloved back to health. If memory serves correctly, then it's no mistake that the same day, the shadowy figure shows up and tries to attack Ren, one Sakura views as taking Shiro away. After attacking Shiro, and realizing that maybe him being wounded wasn't a good thing, she, tinged in regret and remorse, leaves instantly. Her thought patterns are only shown to get more and more possessive over Shiro, the one she sees as being able to make her right again. Her relations with Ren were also very strained after this point. She always knew she had an older sister, and had longed for her to save her from the hell that was the Matto household. The rekindling of their relationship starts out pretty good. Ren and Sakura have a very awkward time trying to open up at first, but once they do, it's really impactful while it lasts. Keywords being, while it lasts. Eventually, the side of her that thinks that they'd be better off without Ren starts to rear its ugly head. The scene where Ren and Shiro remember that dumb kid who failed at high jumps while Sakura said, "Don't take that memory away from me," come to mind. Instances like this spring up until Sakura finally breaks in the infamous scene with her and the King of Chads, Shinji. On that note, time for a personal anecdote. I once had a person I was intimate with, and said person, while not on the level of Sakura, had a history of abuse in the past. In this instance, I was the Shiro, someone looking from the outset who felt guilty for not seeing things sooner. Seeing Sakura go through, while something on an entirely different level, yet still similar, kicked in the response I had to the situation in my life. Sakura needed to learn how to deal with these things in a healthy manner, instead of lashing out at herself and others. I find it would be unwise to say that the shadowy figure and Sakura are different people. They are one and the same, a part of herself that she tries to keep under wraps, away from the rest of the world. Yet, no matter how hard she tries, always manages to leak out. Bottling things up can only work for so long until something starts to break, and what was once a leak becomes a flood as she gives into those feelings completely. This change in her character is even signified by a hair color change, so you know it's serious. Thus, I thought by that point she had fully given up to that side. I believe she was too far gone and couldn't be helped. By this point, she thinks killing Shiro is the best way to keep him to herself. Shiro, meanwhile, was losing his mind more and more after using Archer's arm, heavily foreshadowing that he couldn't make it out of this situation. And Ren was determined that the only way to free her and save everyone was to kill her. Sakura was gone in her negativity more than she's ever been, lashing out at everyone regardless of what they'd done to her. My personal experience told me that she couldn't be helped if she didn't want to be helped in the first place, that anyone who tried would be dragged down with her, if not killed in the process. A flight response, if you will. Sakura, whose only moments of vindication were her relationship with Shiro and the revenge on her scumbag of a brother and grandfather by silencing them for good. The last two only achieved after she had snapped. The Sakura who the reader and Shiro only wanted to protect and take away from harm. The Sakura who cried in the rain, who always had a positive outlook, whose very existence she thought was a mistake. I thought that there was nothing anyone could do, that reaching her at this point was futile. Anyone who tried would just die. She, in a way, had a flight response to everyone around her. Using threats and power she obtained from being the vessel for the Grail, she created a barrier from the outside world. Yet, despite all of that, all the walls, all the threats she threw at everyone, and the power to easily crush them all, Ren Tosaka, finally getting the chance to end it all with the gem sword, to finally avenge all of the fallen and put an end to the suffering in town, can't follow through with it. Despite the years apart, staring only from a distance, from a looking glass, the memories and the bond the two formed in the few short days had a profound effect on Ren. She was unable to hurt her little sister, so she hugs her and tells her that everything will be alright. This one scene changes Sakura from being snapped, a broken person with nowhere to go, and puts her back together again. especially after she realizes she has stabbed her Nae-san. When Shiro finally meets Sakura, even though his mind is almost broken, he can still see what's going on. Sakura is a mess, and the shadows which once gave her power are now threatening her life. After finding out that Ren isn't dead, she leaves with Ryder to get to safety, while Shiro destroys the Grail with one last projection. A projection that will surely destroy him. In the normal ending, it rightfully does. And thus, we have reached the ending of the story, Cherry Blossom's Dream, the most divisive ending of all 5. The main criticism thrown at this ending is that it's too depressing, that Sakura doesn't move on and stays sad for the rest of her life. However, I believe that flies in the face of what the ending was trying to convey. Sakura has an initial breakdown upon remembering the events the next morning, but as shown throughout the ending, she never gives up or gives in to those dark tendencies like before. In this ending, Shiro never makes it back alive, and thus the promise of seeing the cherry blossoms can never be fulfilled. Despite that, Sakura never gave up on herself afterwards. The way I see this ending, while she never gave up on Shiro returning, though personally, I feel that's just a way to keep his memory alive, she also finally decided to live for herself. She decided that she was worth existing, that she has value, and thus she never gives up hope like she did all those years ago. She never again will repeat the mistakes that led her to breed more hate. So, in a way, she has healed herself. She has learned through Shiro's sacrifice that some things shouldn't be taken for granted, and that the past doesn't define who she is anymore. That newfound lease on her life is hers and hers alone, and that life is worth every single second. While not the most happy ending of the bunch, it provides something I think the others lack. That it's possible to live for yourself despite everything that has happened to you or the things you may have done to other people. It can be difficult at times, and the prospect of Shiro never coming back is something she never fully accepts, but she has learned to move on from it. He taught her that much, after all. It's a message that is touched on in the other routes and endings, but this one really hits it out of the park. Everything comes together to create a really beautiful ending that hit me harder than anything else. It's really bittersweet, but that shouldn't mean it's worse than the others by comparison. After years upon years of what can only be assumed as a struggle for her at times, Sakura is still there. That's something I've legitimately thought about every day since finishing the novel and starting this project. Her planting a flower every year for the promised day is a beautiful sentiment, and at the end, as she puts it, she's not sad, and memories of the past keep her company whenever she feels lonely. In short, she's learned to move on and accept herself. A powerful message which seeing her learn throughout the epilogue brings forth an emotion I can only describe as melancholic bliss. The true ending, by comparison, flies in the face of all of these concepts in order to provide a happy ending. To be fair, Cherry Blossom's Dream is admittedly not perfect. Illya, Kirei, and Angra Mainyu never get a resolution in this ending. While Angra gets one in Hollow Ataraxia, the true end is where the first two get wrapped up. However, I personally have numerous problems with how it was handled. The biggest problem is Shiro. Shiro being alive in the true ending is what ruins it for me. Many times throughout the route, it alludes to Shiro's inevitable death. In the extra scene, Sparks Liner High, he uses the last of his sanity to defeat Saber. While he's not dead, he's reached a comatose state by the end of it, essentially leaving him so. In the normal end, he reaches the same fate. He used up the last of his sanity to destroy the Greater Grail, and everything that has been built up until that point is released. What saves Shiro in the true end is one less projection and a Deus Ex Machina in the form of Illya and the Dress of Heaven. While I love Illya, this, along with Kirei reappearing, feels kind of forced. Both of these instances were hinted at throughout the route, but on the same token, instances alluding to the normal end seem to be more numerous by comparison. Additionally, the pacing for these inclusions reaches a grinding halt. Saber in the previous scene was Shiro's last boss, if you will. The tension of will he get past Saber before Ren kills Sakura was tense. The resolution of all this, the reconciling of the sisters, Shiro pulling out Rule Breaker and destroying the Grail, is all stopped by Kirei pulling a "not dead lol" and halting the process. Kirei's involvement wasn't needed here. Shiro was already on his last legs, so asking him to fight again is ridiculous. Illya's sacrifice was all that was needed to make the true end flow better, though that also isn't without its detractions. Illya honestly deserved her own route. The lack of it makes it really feel like she was shoehorned into this ending. I know that Heaven's Feel is a sick fusion of Sakura and Illya's cancelled route, but she doesn't get the characterization she deserves at all. And in the movies, that's only amplified exponentially. I'm working on another video to go into this topic more in detail, but for now, let's just say that she deserved better than to be a sacrifice, and if she was going to be so, she deserved more time to bond with Shiro. Getting past that mountain and into the actual epilogue, one more problem arises. To explain how I feel about this, let's take a look at the good ending of UBW entitled Sunny Day. In this ending, Ren and Saber are still alive by the end. While this sounds good in theory, it feels like a compromise to make the Saber fans happy. In a similar manner, the true end of Heaven's Feel feels like an excuse to reduce the backlash of not having a saccharine happy end. Both endings feel like afterthoughts, though the ending for Heaven's Feel definitely got more build-up. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely things I like about the true ending. If you see my Twitter, you know that I think that this and Hollow Ataraxia gave us the best Medusa design and characterization. But personally, I can't help but feel like something's missing. This is a debate I'm sure will only get more relevant once the movie comes out. While I think that the true ending, Return to Spring, will be what's adapted despite their wickedness in removing Illya scenes, I'm still holding out hope for the normal end. If you have the time, tell me what you think in the comments. Which ending would you prefer to be adapted? And more importantly, why? I look forward to seeing any replies on this. One last thing to note before I end this. In Cherry Blossom's dream, the continuous chanting of "It's Spring" is something that has stuck with me like Archer's Unlimited Blade Works chant as a moment that defined the character and route. In each moment, a promise is made and a promise is broken. Shiro's promise of becoming a hero who saves everyone, and the promise of going to see the cherry blossoms. In the later instance, it shows how Sakura thinks back on the promise, and how she still looks forward to it despite it never happening. In a similar vein to the last episode segment, Sakura and Shiro fulfilling that promise in the afterlife is a fitting touch that wraps up the ending in a nice bow and would make for an amazing after-credits scene. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. My name is Sleepy Crust, and I hope you have a wonderful night.